what I found is that if you try and, unless you're very good, if you try and make a thematic film like buffaloes or death or something like that, it's very difficult to make a film like that. If on the other hand you use the unities, as they're called, time, place and subject, so that you take an occasion, a particular occasion on a particular day and a particular place, then the audience gets interested in that. For example, the film I showed you a little bit about collecting wood. People will get interested in watching someone just making a pile of wood or doing a dance or whatever, in a way that if you just cut a few seconds from different places, different times, and try and make them into a story, it's very difficult to do. One thing that also relates to the ethics of filmmaking is that from early on I realized that it would be very important to get the villagers involved, if possible, in the filmmaking project. Not just to let them think that we were filming them and then the film would be watched by someone else. So in 1993, which is early days, we got a generator because there was no electricity in the village, and a television set, and we had it carried up the mountainside, set it up in the village square, and all the village were invited to come and watch the film about the village. And to get any feedback. They might say, well, we don't want you to go on, or why are you filming all this or that? On the whole, the comments were very positive, and one of the most interesting thing for me to come out of it, I thought they would be most interested in things like the village rituals, dances, big things like that. That didn't really interest them, because they'd been to these and they could see them themselves. It was when you use the camera for observing things which you can't see with the naked eye, which is to coming up very close. So the films they liked most were a woman weaving and showing the exact details of the weaving, or ones which showed the hand movements in the dance or whatever, because you can't normally see that. Another experiment, which this is a continuation of, was something I mentioned earlier, I think, which was when I began to realize the power of film and as a way of teaching. I set up what I called virtual reality days in the Department of Social Anthropology in Cambridge, where we would eat, drink, have incense. We forgot the incense today. We forgot the whiskey as well.
Yeah.
Maybe tomorrow.
You should today prepare for that.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Tomorrow, you're welcome for whiskey.
Tomorrow we will try and provide some drink and incense. Because if you're really going to watch a gurung ritual, you need to be slightly drunk. You need to get a bottle of whiskey for tomorrow.
Okay.
And a lot of water.
So I would try and take my students from their lecture room in Cambridge into this mountain village for a day, which is what I've tried to do with you in a little way. Another thing I realized was that because there were two of us, and because I was filming Sarah, I could start to make a film about how you do fieldwork. Now you may think, well, of course, lots of anthropologists have done that. There is nothing, there is not a single film on the internet or ever made of the kind that I've been showing you about how you do anthropological fieldwork, using film to illustrate that. So my film, I made a little 1-hour film about how you do fieldwork, of which this is an expansion. And it's the only one of its kind, but it seems an obvious thing to do. The filming went on and became more intense as I focused in on my family. The cameras got better, and I'll show you the evolution of the technology. And everything was going fine until I suddenly got a telephone call on the 7th of April 1995 to say that my sister, Dilmaya, had died. And this was a terrible shock, of course, and also a turning point in the filmmaking, because it never became quite as rich after that. But at the end of 1995 they sent a message saying you must come to the funeral and be involved with it. And so just to remind you of that, and slightly on a slightly better projector here, this is just a tiny bit of the film. In fact, I can't blow it up here, but a tiny bit of the film of
There are the photographs, the black and white photographs of her.
yeah. I think perhaps when we've had some drink tomorrow, I'll show you a bit more of the, in perhaps in a larger version, and then see if you begin to feel that you are off in a shamanic ritual of the funeral of my sister in the Himalayas. So we'll stop it there. As I mentioned, 3 years earlier, in 1992, I had made a series of extended narrative interviews of Bill Maya, and this forms the backbone of the book and the films I made about her. We began with a very, very simple camera. Then we have 8mm video. Then you have high 8mm, which came in 1992. And then digital film from 1998. I'll perhaps show you there examples of the kind of cameras. Again, it's better shown in a film that I made in Cambridge on changing film technologies. When people talk about film, they concentrate on either what the French call mise en scène, the filming, the putting into the frame, or what we call editing and the French call montage, the stage of editing. And the revolution in capture devices, which goes up through this to the first digital camera I had, the first one sold in Britain, I'm told, another Sony, which I got in about 1998-9. This was a revolution because it has a firewire at the back. In other words, you could take the film straight out as a DVD stream into a computer. And that was absolutely a transformation. And this was the camera I used for a few years in Nepal. And then, of course, to smaller cameras, and now to mobile phones. So basically, the revolution in capture devices is one revolution. The second is in editing, montage, because non-linear editing, in other words, being able to dot around in editing, is only very recent. I mean, editing suites, when I was taking the thematic, was very large. It was in a building here. I had to book an editing suite, and it was quite complicated. So it was tough. And then they had a small one for the film that goes into this sort of film that goes into here. And I could just borrow it and do it in holidays. Still difficult. So the revolution in editing was really the result of the computer revolution about 2001, when you had the first big external hard disks. But it does link into the third thing, the editing device. The thing that changed and that led to that is really the third thing, which people don't talk about, which is the delivery system. You see, why, the main reason I think many anthropologists never bothered it. I think I'll go back to me talking, because I've shown these devices here. So what I had got onto there was that the revolution in technology consists of really three parts. When anthropologists or filmmakers talk about film, they divide it into two parts: filming, or putting into the scene, as the French call it, or editing, as Americans and English call it, or montage, as the French call it. And so there's the capture and then the editing, and both are equally important. The technology of capturing it went right through the roof. Now is thousands of times better than anything that I had when I first went. And equally important, the technology of editing is now hundreds of times better. So I mentioned there at the beginning, you cut it into pieces, then you could put it on a machine like this, take it, as I did, home and do some editing in the evenings. But it's still a matter of reading it through till you got to the bit you wanted, then copying that bit into another place and then reading it through, and it took quite a long time. What revolutionized it, the situation, as I mentioned, were two things. One, that you could store large amounts of material on a hard disk, an external hard disk, which at the beginning were very expensive, but at least you could get several hours of high quality film alongside your computer. And then the computer editing revolution, Premiere, iMovie, Final Cut Pro, these editing programs, which are now so sophisticated and becoming cheaper that anyone can make quite a good film. You have all the tools that are professional. When I first got involved with this and with television, you'd have a room this size, you'd have equipment that cost millions of RMB, a huge editing suite like this, which only film companies could have, where you could do splicing and mixing and all sorts of clever things and recoloring and whatever. And they would cost 2, 3, 4, 5 million RMB. Now you can get the whole thing for 200 RMB on your laptop, and you can have all the tools that these people had only 15 years ago on your laptop, and you can make all sorts of films. One thing I would recommend is that you, if you go down this and start doing this, that you get an editing system that is simple. What happens with all technologies is that it starts simple and does most of what we need, and then people are paid and employed to make the thing complicated because they need to sell a new copy. So each version becomes more and more complicated. So I use the editing system that comes with an Apple Mac, free, iMovie. It's just part of the Mac software. And even the recent iMovie version is getting quite complicated. So I just get down off the web an early version of iMovie. It's got everything you need for reasonable editing. It has all the clips, the sequences which I mentioned there, a place where you put the sequences together to make up your film there, some things which you want to do like titling, 2 sound lines underneath if you want to put a commentary on or background music or whatever, some transitions so you can fade across or cut across or whatever. And that's all you need really. And if you keep the editing software very simple, you don't have to spend hours and hours trying to work out complicated things. Most of you won't want to make professional level films, and there's no point in trying to do so. Your advantage, if you do anthropological filmmaking, is in the material itself. And as long as that is clear and simply put, without too much editing, then people will watch it and be interested in it. So the editing has changed. The third part of filmmaking, which is not discussed much at all, is how you make the film available to people. Filmmakers are concerned with filming and editing. What really determines how film is used and the value of it is how it can be seen. One of the reasons why anthropologists haven't made films in the past is that if you made a film, like my supervisor, Heimendorf, what did you do with it? I mentioned this with my earlier film. You could show it to your family. Heimendorf made some film for television, but television is not a very good medium because in order to make a television film you need a lot of money, you'll probably have a film crew, they will take over, you lose control of it. The thing that I really like about anthropological filmmaking is that you can do all of it. You can be the anthropologist who knows what to film, you can do the filming, you do the editing, you produce the film. In the past, if you did that, you could do nothing but show it to a small group of students until 10 years ago. Now you can show it to anyone. I began to put my anthropological films onto YouTube in quite late, about 2004-05. This is when YouTube came along. It's only 10 years old. And I was quite nervous, worried that people would steal them or misuse them or write horrible comments to me about them or whatever. So I waited in fear for these things, but none of them happened. No one has stolen my films on the whole. I mean, a few American universities have stolen some of my lectures and used them on their MOOCs, their massive online open course software systems. That's fine. And occasionally I see that people have put my films onto their websites. That's why I want them there. That's fine. But as far as I know, they haven't been misused. And so I've gradually gained confidence, and I've now put up over 2,000 films onto YouTube and onto my own website, which I think I'll probably show you tomorrow, since some of you haven't had a chance to see it, and onto the streaming media service. So now suddenly you're in a position where if you make an interesting film about any part of the world or any subject, you can share it with anyone and put it up. And that suddenly encourages you to film, because you can share it with the people in Nepal, or in Nagaland where I work, or wherever it is. Moving on along the track of what we did, in 1999 I started working with a television company to make a series of films, and we went to Nepal to show films, to make films there for this television series. And I learnt a lot about filmmaking, as I mentioned, working with them, about how you don't anticipate answers and questions and get film angles and so on. And maybe tomorrow I'll show you, those of you who haven't seen it, the result of this in the way that Sarah filmed the filmmakers. So you can learn a little bit about filmmaking from that series. At this time, just at this time, 1999, as I mentioned in a film I showed you, the first digital camera. That camera you saw on the film was the first digital camera in the United Kingdom that came to an ordinary individual like me. My neighbour happened to know they were just made them, and so I bought the first one, I think. And it had this revolutionary idea. Not only did you have digital film, but you had what was called a firewire, an IE 19994 lead or something, which meant you could take this digital stream and put it into your computer. That was a revolution. That was 1999, 1998. And so I began to take digital film. The moment you've got digital film, you can then move between media. You can have digital photographs, digital film, digital text. So the digital revolution, which standardized all different media, is only 14, 15 years old. The first cameras were perfectly adequate, good sound and so on and so on. But soon they improved. You've got, they were known as one-chip cameras, then you've got three-chip cameras, which I started using a couple of years later, and I do my interviews with three-chip cameras. And now, of course, you have high-definition cameras like this one. This is an HD camera, and you get wonderful film. The quality of the film from this camera is perfectly good for any broadcasting. You could show this on prime-time television, and no one would really notice that it wasn't an absolutely professional camera. And this camera costs about 1,500 RMB, £150. So, what is the value of anthropological film for us as anthropologists, if we're going to be anthropologists? Well, one is the archival value, which I've stressed quite a lot. My supervisor had saved images of many cultures in his filmmaking and photography. And his film is now of immense archival importance. He was the first filmmaker in Nepal. He was one of the first filmmakers in central India, in Hyderabad. He was one of the first filmmakers in northeast India, Arunachal Pradesh and Assam. And the films he took are now of situations and societies which have gone, disappeared. One of the roles of anthropology has always been the rescue anthropology element, trying to preserve something tangible about the cultures that are being shattered and battered, not only by Western imperialism, but in China now by economic development. So, disappearing worlds, and the project that we're doing with Sichuan University is about this. You are sitting here in this university in the middle of the most important ethnographic area in the world. There's more diversity and more ethnographic groups within 500 miles of Chengdu than anywhere else in the world. The great, something like 20, 30, 40 million ethnographic minority peoples live around in this area, and 99.9% of their cultures will be gone in 25 years. If you don't capture it, no one will. We've got lost and gone. So there is a huge task, and some of you I hope will contribute to that, and that is part of the aim of the project we set up with Sichuan. We set up something called Digital Himalaya, we set up something called the World Oral Literature Project, and now the Cambridge Rivers Project working with Sichuan. But there are other values for filmmaking which are not often talked about, and I'll mention these now. There are a number of ways in which filmmaking helps an anthropologist carry out the primary duty of anthropology, which is to understand another society and to bring that understanding back into our own world. One is helping us to see the society better. The more ways we observe and capture the society, the better. I mentioned in other talks the census, the diary, the survey, the photograph, and so on. But filming adds a whole new dimension, almost as rich as all those other forms put together. It helps you to look at a society from a different angle and to revisit the past. And this is for a simple reason. We look at the world through our eyes like this, and we pick up a lot about it. But when you take a camera to the field, a film camera, you have to decide about why you are filming. There's no point in just leaving a camera on a wall and filming everything that goes past. There's some people do that. You have to focus, pay attention, decide on the subject you are looking at. And that makes you think consciously, well, why is this interesting? Why am I filming? Whether I should be close, far, and so on and so on. So you concentrate. The camera forces you to concentrate on what you're doing. What it also does is it gives you a tool which is in effect a telescope, so you can see far away, and a microscope, so you can see tiny details. Many of the detective stories in the later 19th century, particularly the famous ones about Sherlock Holmes. Have any of you heard of Sherlock Holmes?
Yes.
Okay, well, Sherlock Holmes quite often uses cameras and also lenses and to look very closely at things, tiny clues, which are terribly significant for him. You know, the kind of ash on someone's sleeve, or a little bit of hair, or whatever. You can do the same with filmmaking. You can come right up close to someone's hand and see how it's working. You can look at a person's heel and see how much it is bruised by all the walking around the village. You can see the expression of delight or sadness on a person's face. It's as if you are doing a Sherlock Holmes investigation of that society. So this is a great advantage, and even if you don't use that film straight away, later you can re-examine the society through a microscope if you want to. Very small gestures and so on. For instance, when I was filming, as I have done, interviews with my granddaughter, Lily, I filmed her over 6 months from the age of about 2.5. Her facial expressions, for instance, when I teased her, when I was not being very nice to my granddaughter when she was about 3 or 4 years old, I filmed the moment when I teased her, and I saw her lip curling up in irritation that her grandfather was teasing her. Or when I filmed her learning how to tell a lie. Lying, as you know, is one of the most important gifts of human beings. And how does a little girl learn how to lie? So I asked her a question when she was 3, which forced her at first to give a certain response. I said, "Do you dream about me?" I'd been discussing her dreams when she was 3, 3.5. And she said, "No, I don't dream about you." She knew that I wanted her to dream about me, but she had to tell me the truth. So she told me she didn't dream about me, and I was sad. When she was 3.5 or 4, I asked the same question. She now knew, but she hadn't really learnt how to lie properly, so she paused for about a second and then said yes. But I caught that pause. The 6 months later I said, "Do you dream about me?" She said, "Oh yes." So you can catch these tiny expressions and movements through filming. Another advantage of video is that it alters our relationship to time. It can be used to slow down time. And what I mean by that is that if you're watching many events in many societies, things happen too quickly, and too many things happen too quickly. I remember talking to one of the greatest anthropologists of the 20th century, who wrote one of the 2 or 3 greatest books on an African ritual, Audrey Richards, who wrote a book called Chisungu, which is the analysis of a girl's initiation ritual in Africa, East Africa, where she went. And I asked Audrey, "How did you record all the details that you put in your book?" And she said it was impossible, really. That book is just a tiny bit of what I saw, because it was all happening too quickly. and this is the case in many rituals around the world, or in bits of technology and so on. What you can do is slow this down by filming the ritual and all the complex movements and so on. And then, with a modern editor, you can go through it and examine it frame by frame or bit by bit, and see the little movements, the little actions, the little bits of music, the way people are interacting, how they're watching each other and so on. So you can examine time again and slow it down and speed it up. And you can't normally do this in life. So what I'm discovering is that modern technology has turned film into a potentially enormously rich component of fieldwork. You can download it, you can look at it frame by frame, as I mentioned, even early film. And so a camera is a kind of excellent notebook, supplementary to the diary. It doesn't replace the diary, but it is a notebook, and some anthropologists use it as a notebook. And I've given you an example, this example, the early film of Pokhara in 1969, and then later examining that as a kind of notebook of things I hadn't noticed at the time. The fact that you can now use it as a collaborative device, that you can share it with the people themselves. I mentioned taking the camera back to the village and showing it to people. But now with the internet, just in the last 3 years, this has all been transformed again. For example, when Sarah and I went to this village earlier this year, I took copies of some of the books. I'm writing a series of books. This is one, and there are going to be 5 books. One on Dil Maya, the lady I mentioned, one on the physical world with the Gurums, one on the social world, and one on the ritual world. And I had already written a rough copy of the spiritual world and the physical world. So I took the books back, but I also took on a USB stick. Well, actually I took them back on DVDs at that time, but I would now take them back on USB stick. I took back a set of 20 DVDs, which were all the films to go with the book. Things have moved on even since those 6 months, and I now do it another way, which I'll tell you about tomorrow, and which I'm illustrating here, which is an embedded PDF with the films in it, which is what I'm doing for these books. But basically, I took the films back and gave them to 3 or 4 organisations and people in the field and said, could you just go through all this film and check it? I gave it to 1 or 2 individuals I trust, and my nephew, Shana, and so on. Said, look, I don't understand your culture fully, obviously as an outsider. I can't understand all the language. Could you go through all this film and see if there is anything that I have filmed which should not be made public? Someone talking about someone else, which I don't understand, someone doing something inappropriate, things that shouldn't be there, or things I have misunderstood and described in the book wrongly. So the days in which the anthropologists went there, came back, wrote their book, put it in a library, other anthropologists read it, are long gone. You now work with the people. They may be filming themselves. Many of my Gurum friends have cameras and they do their own filming. So you share the filming, you check with them that what you're doing is acceptable, and then you can make it freely available. A lot of this material is also important because, as we've discussed a little before, the Gurums are no longer living in the villages. They live in New York or Chengdu, or I'm sure there's some Gurums in Chengdu, certainly lots in London. And so this village is a virtual village all over the world. So when I put up films on YouTube or on my website, they are watched by Gurums all around the world, and they copy them and put them onto their own cultural organisation websites and so on. So the potentials of using your film have expanded alongside the technologies for data capture, and you don't want to go mad. Filmmaking takes a lot of time and effort. And there is a temptation now with mobile phones to take too much film. There is some advantage in filmmaking being a little bit difficult, so that you don't do too much of it. Like, as I mentioned with recordings, if it's too easy, then you just get hours and hours and hours of meaningless film. But the potentials are huge, and so perhaps I'll end with two last films here. One is some simple advice on filmmaking, which will perhaps repeat what I've said, but we'll see whether I say other things, and also it will reinforce some of what I've said.
Well, there's sort of practical advice which you already know, which is that the camera can come between you and the subject, and also can be frightening in many cultures. So you've got to take the usual thing, carry the camera around with you all the time, and people get used to it and so on. Try and get them as involved as possible in the filmmaking, get them to do some filming, show them what you're filming, make it into a joint project with the people you're working with. Anyway, they'll probably be filming you, and anyway, it's going to go up onto the internet. So it's a different world. It's basically as with writing. It's not us observing them now, it's us doing something together. So if you say this is a joint project, we're going to have a community film project, I'll provide some of the technical expertise to deal with them, maybe some of the hardware, but let's do it together and you work out what you want me to film. So it should now be a joint thing which you do with them. And of course, you will have copies of all the stuff and it'll be useful for your grandchildren. So, as with much filmmaking now, as with the interviews, which are becoming much more, working with the University of the Third Age and others, and I think in China it's going to be big. It's what families do with, to record their lives and so on. It's what communities do. So that's one thing. The second thing is that filmmaking arises out of a relationship, and it has to be an ethical relationship. So all the ethical constraints you abide by when you're writing exaggerated, so be very careful what you film and find out what upsets people in different cultures. In the one I was in, they don't like to be filmed eating, so I had to be careful with that. They don't like to be filmed when they're looking really dirty and dishevelled or photographed. So find out what upsets them and avoid that. I mean, when I filmed in the village in Nepal, in about 1992, after I'd been filming for 2 or 3 years seriously, there were no electricity in the village, no televisions. We brought on a porter's 5 hours walk up to the village. We brought a television set, a dynamo, and we showed to the whole village 2 or 3 hours of the footage I'd taken up to that point, asked them whether this was fine. Interesting, I mean, really. The things I thought they were interested in, which is the village rituals and so on, they weren't interested at all in. The things that a zoom lens can do, small gestures with hands and so on, and close-ups of faces they love, because it's things they couldn't see themselves, so that the camera can extend the vision. So I did that. Then later, 3 or 4 years later, I'd done a lot of filming of rituals and of family life. I took all this film out and I gave it to a couple of people on the culture, and I said, please look through the 30 hours, 40 hours of this film. If there's anything that upsets you, tell me, and I won't show it. This time when we go, my idea is to take this is version 1.1.
I think I've said all this, so I'll stop there.
120 hours of film.
This is one of the books, the other books, as you
Give
can see,
it to 2 people out.
The Spiritual World of the Qurans. So, we'll see if there's anything new in here.
When I did my early filmmaking, it was not very satisfactory for the reasons I've explained. You had to cut up the film, it was expensive, when I went back to Nepal in 1986, I took the same camera, the one I had before, and so in 1986 I filmed with that camera, and the film was not very satisfactory at all. Then the Japanese came along. They invented
I think
video,
this is the same.
and the revolution of video rate, and the quality of the film was not as good. So my film up to now.
This is a Video 8 camera. You can see the tilt-up thing on the right, which is, so you have to look through it at a person like this, and you can see the quite large size. Pretty large, pretty heavy, and the result was not very good film at all. But at least it was quite good. It was fantastic at the time. But now we think it's rather rough.
One, which is taken with the older camera, is not about half the quality of this high 8 camera. I mean, this camera is just a marvel. It's got very good sound. This sound is actually a zoom mic sound. In other words, when you zoom, it actually zooms in on the subject. I didn't realise this till later, why the sound is so good. If you zoom in on something in the distance, the camera zooms, the sound zooms in as well. It's wonderful in low light. It's pretty portable, and of course the films last 1 hour. And you can then take the film off and edit it. There was a limitation in the editing. The editing was difficult, and for a long time I couldn't do much editing. But it totally transformed my life, and particularly when I got a high 8 camera like that.
Right. So, how many of you have ever done any serious filmmaking? That is to say, you have filmed, edited, and edited your film to show to other people. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Natasha is one of the people. So what I think I'll do, this afternoon unfortunately I've got to meet up with some people who are interested in the database system that I was showing you. So we will finish at lunchtime, i.e. in about 25 minutes. So there won't be a chance for questions this afternoon, so I thought perhaps we'd have a question and answer session now. And tomorrow perhaps we'll have more time for some questions. But since you've done some, Natasha has actually done film training and worked with television companies in Shanghai and elsewhere. So, Natasha, any questions, any comments, any things I've missed out? Well, many things I've missed out, but is there anything you'd like to say?
Actually, I learned a lot during this lecture because it's really different from making videos for people who are ready for that, and people who is unexpected to it. So actually, I think there are a lot of difference between those two different types of making video. I'm sorry, and that is what I think I should think about more. And actually, those details of how to arrange your shot, I think it's awesome actually, because I got courses about that, but I think you got the experience from the practice or your making, so I think it's awesome. And I don't know, just when we learned that, we more focused on how to make the image more beautiful or express your feeling. For example, if you want to make it seems really horrible or very nervous, you should shake or move your camera very fast. Those kind of stuff, we focus more on that. But I think during field work, it's quite different. And I think I should think about it more before I sets more comments.
Well, those are all very helpful comments because I have noticed, for example, the point about if you're going to a film school and learning how to film, what they imagine is that you're going to make a movie, an art movie, or a promotional movie, or an investment or something like that, where you concentrate on using the camera to get the person emotionally involved, or move them, or get them to buy your brand of clothing or whatever it is. Whereas anthropology has got an entirely different emphasis, which is on the people themselves and what you're recording about their lives, and therefore the techniques. There are a number of simple guides. For example, there's an iMovie, which is the Apple Mac, iMovie for dummies, or iMovie for whatever, which is a very simple guide. You basically don't want to make it too complicated. There are just a few very simple things of the kind that I mentioned, which if you observe that, will make reasonable films. So be aware of, it's useful if you're going into the media and you're going to make films, going to film schools and getting professionalized, but it will take you off in another direction from the one that I've been talking about. Anyway, we'll come back and thank you for your comment. There was someone else who's done some filming.
Actually in China, now we have some projects. They give the camera to the relatives, then they can shoot themselves because they have logistics. So they think that's a real life thing. And sometimes they will show themselves to them, but maybe that's not true. And so there are some projects, and they use film, and now some of the TV stations still televise these programs to nationally. So especially in Qinghai province, there are some projects. They use the film to conserve for conversation, conservation, so that's quite interesting because they know their own lives and they can show something, everything in detail. So that's very popular.
That's an interesting point. There are in fact national competitions. I remember seeing a film about a national competition where they gave out hundreds of cameras to different communities around China, and they asked them to make films about their communities, and then they all went to Beijing or wherever it was, and then they had a prize for the best film, the next best film. And there were some extremely good films were made by local people. On the other hand, you have to remember, A, that they may become quite political. In Shanghai, for example, there's obviously a lot of worry about identity and so on. So camera may be used to emphasize identity differences and so on. And also it doesn't necessarily follow that people within a community understand it any better than anyone else, or that they haven't had some basic introduction to filming that they'll make good films. You can know a lot and make a terrible film about your community. As long as the people are given just the sort of simple points that I've been making before they start filming about technology and the techniques of filming, then very quickly they may well make extremely good films. And as you say, they've tried this with all sorts of things. For example, they tried it with, as you say, with minority groups or remote areas in China. They've also tried giving cameras to children to see what kind of film they'd make. If you look at the world from here, what does it look like? A small child. And they've done this also in India. There are community film projects in India where people are given cameras where you can express yourself. And also, that reminds me of another point which I stress to my students, which is that if you want to understand how film works, which I think is a vital part of being educated to be a citizen in the modern world. In other words, absorb much of our information through film, through television and through the media. Most of our information comes that way. We really ought to be trained a little bit in knowing how we are being influenced and how film is affecting us. And if you don't understand anything about film, you will just, it's like reading a book and not understanding really how to read. We are taught all the time at university consciously to be critical and critical reading and how to analyse reading and writing. But most people are not taught at all about how to understand a world awash with images, photographs, how to read photographs, how to read films. Probably the best book on filmmaking is by an American who taught at New York University, James Monaco, and he's written an excellent book called How to Read Film, which is all the philosophy of filmmaking, the history of filmmaking, the technology of filmmaking, how film works, how it influences you, all in one book. And I think that all people going through education from school onwards should be getting courses in filmmaking and appreciating and analysing film. And the best way to do that is to give them cameras, because as soon as you're doing it, you want to begin to understand what works and what doesn't work and how you can trick people. Give them cameras, give them editing facilities, and get a group of students at any age, children upwards, to make a film, show it to their friends, see what's right, what's wrong, what works, what doesn't work, and to analyse what they're watching on television as well. So, I mean, it's a bit strange that I'm giving you a talk about filmmaking, because I'm absolutely hopeless with my eyes looking at images. I like music, I like writing, but ever since I was quite young I've been completely visually illiterate. You know, I don't particularly enjoy going to art galleries. I know about the history of art a bit, but paintings and visual arts on the whole affect me much less than sound and writing. But for some reason I realised with my mind that all this is important, and also it helps me communicate, which is what I like doing. If I had sat you down, this is now our 4th day together, you may not realise. If I had sat you down for 4 days and just talked at you for 4 hours a day, 4 days, that's 16 hours, there would be no one left here except my faithful wife with her camera. You would have got bored. The fact that I can show you bits of film interspersed through the talking makes it much more real, and so for practical reasons I'm interested in filmmaking, and as an anthropologist who wants to document and record and archive societies, I can see its value. So there was one other person who'd done some film making, editing. Was there? Yes.
I'm wondering that if you would you use Steadicam rather than that to make the film the Steadicam?
Yeah.
And so you say we won't use a quickly pan or zoom in, zoom out, but when we're recording something, we see something that is how to say it will not move.
Yeah.
Yes. So if we use Steadicam of that, and when we're recording something that is this.
Yeah.
Yes. So it helps us. It helps us to know what you recorded, and won't feel dizzy. Yeah. That is my question. That how to choose the things. And another question is, would you use traditional camera or a V-bar to recording in this time? Because in some place that digital camera maybe face some problem, such as the electronic or the
maybe too wet is not good for the digital camera.
Thank you.
Here's an example. I'm just holding this. This has a little frame around your face. So I can see in this camera, your face is absolutely straight. I'm hitting it dead on. All right? The frame judders about a little bit and I readjust the camera. This camera is so light, I can hold it like this. I've been holding it like this all morning. And I am 72. So I'm not, you know, a young person. All right? If I can hold this steady, like this, for a whole morning, and get your face framed perfectly.
It's also got, as you probably know, the cunning Japanese or someone else invented something called steady shot. This has got steady shot on. Most cameras have this now, which actually, in some magical way, they stop too much shaking. So it's electronically compensating for too much shaking. So the steady shot, it's not only my wonderful wife at the age of 72 who's keeping it steady, but it's also the wonderful Japanese engineers who are keeping it steady. Any machine in different environments is dangerous. And if you didn't take a digital camera and you took an analog camera, which is the old kind of camera, that is just as susceptible to moisture and wetness and so on as any other. Perhaps one sensible thing nowadays, as we've done on this trip, is to take two cameras, because the worst thing is if the camera breaks down. So I've got this camera here, which has been working fine, but I've also got in my house the older kind of camera, which takes, like that one, takes cassettes, which is the kind that I always used. And if this one breaks down, its actual recording, sadly, is not as good as this, because this is high definition. And it's also not as simple to put onto your computer, because you have to, well, it's reasonable, you have to play it onto a computer. It has the great advantage of this camera here, which is that it produces a physical object, a digital video. And the great danger with this kind of camera is that just pressing one lever, one mistake, or going through the Chinese customs or whatever way, can wipe. You can very easily wipe an electronic digital recording if you get infrared rays or something on it. So with this, I make a copy onto here, and then I make a copy onto two external hard disks, and then wipe it off there. So I've got it in 3 different places, and when we travel around, we will have them distributed between Sarah, myself, and the other luggage, because any one of them could easily get wiped. So there is that practical difficulty. The first question you asked, I think, was looking at 2 different things. One is, you're right, if you're watching someone doing something, I can only be at this distance from them. When you're watching someone, if you're talking to them, you don't want to suddenly zoom in on them, because that's unreal, and you're not that close to them. So it can have a bad effect. You want to keep the distance more or less constant. When I do the interviewing, I haven't talked about interviewing today, I tend to go for head and shoulders, about here, and the shoulders. You must get in the top of the head. If you lose the top of the head, it loses all its meaning. So leave a little bit of space above the top of the head. Probably not go too close like this. This is rather unnatural if you have someone passing. But here is quite natural. You look at the top half of someone's body. But if you suddenly zoom in and zoom out, that's unreal. But you were actually, in your gestures, suggesting you had a camera rather like that, or even bigger, which you put on your shoulder. 5 years ago, those were the kind of cameras people would have been taking. Quite a large camera like this, which is too heavy really to hold like this, and this is why you see cameramen with the thing on their shoulder. Now those days are past. It's tiny little things like this, which also have the other advantage, which I didn't mention, which is that interesting things happen when you don't expect them. It's no good having a biggish camera like this, which you keep in a box in your office or your room or wherever you're living in your fieldwork, and you think, oh well, today I'm going to go to a ritual, I'll take my camera. You need to have it with you all the time. You need it in your pocket, because at any moment, suddenly, something interesting is going to happen, not when you're not expecting it. And it's those small, unexpected, interesting things which you just take the camera out and you film. One great advantage of this particular camera is that you film immediately. Even with my other camera, it takes a few seconds to get ready to film. And it's in those few seconds you properly use whatever it was that you wanted to film. So just keep it in your pocket, make it simple. Much of life consists of keeping things as simple as possible. That's why I talked about writing yesterday. Keep it as simple as possible. A pen, a piece of paper, and you sitting in a chair. That's all you need to write. To film, just a very simple little camera like this. And if you have to trade off the quality of the image against the simplicity of the recording device and its non-threatening nature, it's much more important that it's not threatening and that it's very simple to use, that you don't have to think about it while you're doing it, than having a complicated camera where you have to adjust all the settings and so on. Yes?
But it's just recording. How to attract the audience to long time to watch the film if it's just recording data? Because it's very simple, you can catch it anytime.
Well, that is the whole next stage, which is, I talked about a little bit, which is basically if you film something that is interesting, in anthropological filmmaking, in professional filmmaking, you'll use a tiny bit of this here, a tiny bit there, and you're concentrating on the very good shots. When I worked with a television company, I was quite surprised and also at times annoyed, because they didn't seem to be interested in the thing that was happening. They just wanted to get a good shot, so they would go up and go like this, like this, and the fact that you had something interesting happening didn't interest them. They wanted something which on television would have a big impact, some odd angle or some close-up or whatever. For instance, perhaps I'll put it on and you can just watch it at the end. My most popular, or the most popular film on my YouTube channel is taken by this film company I was working with in Kyoto, and it's of a Maiko or geisha having her face or painting her face. So you watch from the beginning when she's just got an ordinary face to each tiny little bit red here and black and white on the back. You watch this for 25 minutes. They filmed her.
This was a particularly good and interesting cameraman, though,
yes,
wasn't
he was
it?
a Japan. I mean, he was an Englishman who had spent much time in Japan. He understood what was happening. And this film has been watched 2 million times on YouTube, and it's the only film on YouTube with this thing being done. Even so, people complain. I get messages on YouTube saying, why did the cameraman keep moving? Why didn't he just let it happen? Why didn't he go up too close, come out, do this, do that? And so I put an explanation saying this wasn't meant to be a film of 20 minutes watching this thing. They were just only going to use 10 seconds of this film. And so he needed to try and get a fantastic 10-second shot. in his 20 minutes. But I've taken the whole 20 minutes and it's worthwhile watching even so. So basically the aim of the two kinds of filming are entirely different, and in anthropological filmmaking, as I say, you just let the thing roll. In terms of getting people to watch your film, of course you can track them, as you are tracked. You can't escape them, you have to watch my films, and you're being educated hopefully in doing so. But on YouTube you can't track people, they'll either watch it or they won't watch it. But human beings are curious and they like to see things which they've never experienced, and they like to see it in detail, and they like to see it happening in time. And so as long as someone is doing something interesting and you're allowing the viewer to feel that they're there and they're watching it happen, people will watch film that you take. But if you try to be too clever and you try and make a very theoretical film, which is doing what a book does, like Gurung attitudes towards death. Now, I couldn't make a film about Gurung attitudes towards death. I could write an article on it, but if I started to make a film, I could show a funeral, and I could say there are different ways of funerals, and I could show different funerals, but that's about all I could do. Actually, what goes on in their heads and the analyses and so on have to be done in another form, in a book and an article. So theoretical, abstract kinds of ideas. And that's the weakness of film. The strength of film is emotional involvement in being there. The weakness of film is you can't express abstract ideas in it very much. This is why film is disliked and not used by most anthropologists. Most anthropologists say, well, anthropology is an analytical discipline, just trying to get at the deep structures of thought and ideas of people. You can't do that in film. You can show how they live, what they do, but you can't show their inner mental worlds in film, and to a large extent that's right. But what I've tried to do in this series of talks is, for the first time, and you're the first audience that's ever seen this, is to bring together theoretical description in my words and in the texts with the power of film as an emotional, expressive, involving medium, and put the two together. The degree to which I've succeeded is up to you to decide, but it is an attempt to bring those two things together. Okay? So, yes.
I'm sorry, I have a question. As you said, there were always unexpected things. So I wonder how you solve the problem. I mean, how you figure out how often you should turn it on. Because for us, when we made videos, we try to arrange those shots based on storyboards.
Yeah.
So we do everything just by sequence. And even if the script is not written by me, I can tell them, oh my God, sorry, I missed this, please repeat. But I mean, in field work, we cannot do that. So I wonder how to find the balance, how often we should turn it on, keep it on.
All the time.
I see.
My wife answers yes.
Otherwise you'll miss vital things. I mean, I can't tell what's going to happen with you, in a second. You might drop dead suddenly. I hope you won't, but and if I don't turn my camera off, I'd miss it.
Well, that's I qualify that somewhat, because obviously if you're awake for, say, 15 hours a day and in a community and you have it on all the time, you're going to have 15 hours of film every day. But film more than you need to. Certainly don't do anything like the story.
But in a ritual or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
in a ritual, film all of it, or as much of it as possible. And in much of social life, film extra doesn't cost much, except in storage and finding the bits and pieces. But to show you the sort of, usually when I go to do field work in Nepal, now, in a period of, I'd film perhaps 10 hours a week. So that's an hour or so a day, which is quite a lot of film. Perhaps not as much as that, but if there's something important going on, an hour a day. Sarah's filming 5 or 6 hours a day at the moment because of I'm doing these lectures and so on. But an hour a day, you catch a lot in an hour a day. And that's perfectly possible. You don't, as Sarah says, you don't know what's going to happen next. So you may get a lot of boring waiting. The question of will you do it again, as in the storyboard, I missed that. You can actually do that very often. I mean, if you say if they're weaving, or if they're doing a ritual, most things can be done again. If you're doing agriculture and you want to film from 2 different angles and you have only one camera, they're ploughing along and you say, could you plough that bit again? And then you film it from another angle or whatever. People on the whole, as long as you don't do it all the time and it's not wasting their time too much, are prepared to. And when I worked with television, for instance, when they were interviewing me and my views on things, we usually did most of these interviews a couple of times because they'd like to do it from there and the sun was in the wrong position and anyway I hadn't said it right. So, but I found after they'd asked me to do it 2 or 3 times, I said no, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm fed up. I've had enough, which may also be true for you with your lunchtime. I think at that point I'll stop. I'm